Alrighty, so week 7 is now history, and week 8 is heading at us. And I really enjoyed looking at your code that you did for the DDs, the data dictionaries, and most of you did this, but there was also a requirement to do a list of data dictionaries. We call this in JavaScript a array of objects. I just like the words better for JavaScript. It is basically the same data structure, but this is why I'm here to teach my brain to use two different terms for the same basic thing. No, that's actually not why I'm here. That is one of the requirements of me being here. So it is Friday, and I have finished now the second week of code reviews, and they take so much time, but I'm so glad I do them for so many reasons. And I probably talked about this last week, so I won't go over it again. But it is really, honestly, the only way I know how to assess how well a student is. Because here's the reality: some students who are going to come in with the experience, they're going to know how to come up with a concept and code it. Some students, this is their first exposure, so them doing it is a little more challenging. But I think across the board, the one thing I feel about Python is really that it's not intimidating. I think compared to JavaScript, it is, and it is not. JavaScript can be a little more intimidating, mostly because you have to deal with the browser. But once it's like anything, the more time you spend with something, the more you get it. So now that I'm done with that, and you're for the most part done, I think I maybe have one to finish, right? It's time to turn our attention, not fully, but at least to set our focus as we move through the next couple of weeks to our next dev. So these devs are spaced 6 weeks apart. So the first one was at 6 weeks, and now the next one's at week 12. And we are heading into week 8. And so I at least drafted, and I think I covered my draft in week 8, Learn Together. Or maybe it was week 9. It was probably week 9 because I just finished this week 9. And by the way, in week 9, okay, so just to be kind of step through, week 8, we're going to do and I kind of came up with it on the fly last Friday when I was being asked about, do you have week 8 ready? And so what I did is I kind of threw down a little bit of a challenge, and I decided to pull the game part of next week back, mostly because I hadn't done a good job of thinking it through. It's what happens sometimes. And here's what I want you to know. And I've said it before, but I feel a need to say it again. This is the first time I have taught this class. Therefore, all the content, except for Al's Udemy course, all the content I'm doing from first run. This is version 0.1, if you know semantic versioning, of this class. So there may be a little bump in the road here and there. And that's what happens. I try to do my best, but sometimes it just happens. And this is, by the way, in programming, coding, development, software engineering, we talk about the idea of iteration, right? So you do something, you see how well it works, and you fix it. So, this may not make you feel better, but, after teaching this 5 more times, I think this course is going to be awesome. I actually hope it's awesome now, but that's just my ego right there. So what I did, and again, you're going to hear this in week 9, which, by the way, in week 9, I spent a day this week getting virtual environment working. Now, I just need to, and I know we're not going to get to it for another 2 weeks, but I just want to say that's one of the requirements I'm going to add to the dev. One, not that you have to use it, but if you use external libraries, which over half of you did, then you have to set up a virtual environment. And not only that, the other thing is I ran into it twice where people use libraries that were platform specific, meaning they required Windows, and that definitely we can't do again because I can't run the code on I could, but I get a little stubborn too. So, all right. So let me just show you what I have for now, right? So if I scroll through, and by the way, let's just take a brief look at the calendar, right? Here we are at towards the end of September. So October is heading at us relatively quickly. So our Dev 1 is due at the end of October, right before Halloween. So this didn't come from this class, but I'm modifying the code review schedule to be more clear about something because when I was having to schedule you all this week. So what I'm going to do, and this has not been released yet, you can't sign up yet, but I'll just tell you, I'm setting it up to where, right, it's the before the due date and then after the due date for sessions. And then what will happen is if your need of code help, right? Remember the idea of review versus assistance, which I had quite a few reach out for assistance, which is awesome, right? I'm just going to set up my office hours. And then, of course, hopefully you know this, you can reach out. One of the things I know Oscar mentioned this week was the idea of having more of us come into a Zoom to talk about code reviews or to see an example. And I'm open to that idea. My only concern there is making people show up at a specific time. I tend to want to give flexibility, but I totally understand his reasoning. Yeah, I diverged. Let me come back. So just know that this is one change that I will make. And remember, right, the sooner you come to see me, which means, of course, the sooner you have to create something. So you're going to be saying, well, then what does Dev 1 require? Well, this is a rough draft. So you're actually going to see it in week 9 because I've already recorded week 9. And this is, now I'm going to add a little to it here just on the conversation. And then this again, and here's where I would love your input, right? Because what I did to create this is I looked at what we're going to be covering, right? So next week we cover strings. This idea of running programs from the command line, I find not that useful. I'll be honest with you. I think the idea of understanding how to update your path on Windows, you can do the same thing on Mac and Linux, but understanding the batch file, those are all good. This is why in week 9 I'm doing the virtual environments, because I think it is the idea of more the external things on Python, not at the internals, but like the whole ecosystem, and we might refer to that as DevOps if you've heard that. But we're going to be covering regular expressions and files before we get to our next dev. And so, of course, these are the things that you're going to see, the dictionaries, strings, regular expressions, and files. So, but what I decided to do with Dev 1 was more put it in terms of what I want the functionality to be, and then I'm going to clarify to your feedback and just thinking about it. So, like get user input. Now, in that week 9, he does talk about how to pass args into a file, right? So, or you could also, so you could do that, or you could just use an external file to get user input, right? Store the input, or really process data. So if I think about my app, my rock, scissors, paper game, right? So what I would do is when the user's playing the game, I would store the game detail and into a file that I would then, as they come on to play, give them, and this would be a great output, is the leaderboard. Like what are some of the statistics, right? So there's different ways to do that, but the idea of storing their input based on your specific concept, right, in a process file, processing that data into some kind of file, because we're going to learn more about how to handle files. And then read this file. This is what I was talking about with the leaderboard. Read the file and generate some summary data. right? And with regular expressions, I said use regular expressions for input or other data processing concepts. But the cool thing is, as we move now into that content and I go through it, and we collectively go through it and do a learn together, I'll have a better idea about that. And then handle user. Now, this is nothing new, but I want to emphasize this. The importance of this again is handling errors. So the try accept from both the user input and, of course, reading and writing user data. I mean, that's so important. If you're saving, that's vitally important information. Maybe not in our context, but in general when you're developing. So you want to make sure you've handled those exceptions. And then here's the kind of the thing I thought at the end. And again, remember, I want your input. And I know you want probably a lot of clarification that I may not be able to give you. So maybe what I would be helpful to me this week and helpful to us is like, what would you add here? Right? Would there be something now that you've gone through the process of a dev, and now that I've laid out some general requirements, what would you add? Right? So, but the last item here is add some Python functionality commands we have not seen in this course, and at least one example. Like one student asked me, I think it was on attendance today, about doing a graphical user interface, and there are different ways in Python to add some kind of graphical command. And we can do it through HTML. There's also some stuff just built into Python or libraries that we could get, and you could do that. So that would be a good example, right, of doing that for this dev. So, and I think most of you appreciated kind of the flexibility to do something that, because each of you, again, comes in with a different level of experience, allows you to kind of create your own project in a way. I mean, obviously you want to make sure you tick off my requirements here, but again, just think about this as a part of your reply. What would you add to this, right? But it's also true that we're going to see as we go through the course, we'll get more of that as well. So I have, as of now, we're ending week 7, coming into week 8. So I have week 8 and 9 set up. My task, starting Monday, is to actually do because I did 8, but I got to do 10. I have to do the regular expressions, which is we start here and we'll finish in week 10. This is where we're doing the virtual environment. And then what I'll do, of course, is do some kind of learn together exercise around regular expressions, which are so good. They're basically like little mini programs, but just in matching on particular parts. Anyway, you'll learn as we get there, and the power of regular expressions. And I'm actually looking forward to this section. I've kind of taken a peek at it, but I'm looking forward to doing it because I code along with you. Just know that this is true. Anyway, it is a fabulous day in California in the Central Valley. It is clear. So grateful for that. If you want a documentation recommendation, I know you didn't ask for one, but I'll give you one anyway. There's 2 that I think are really worth your time. One is A Social Dilemma, and I find that documentary to be enlightening, and I think especially the younger you are, the more important that is to understand. And the second one is Kiss the Ground, which is a soil regeneration importance of how we can combat the amount of climate change and really just the unhealthiness of our world. So that's that for me. But, I reflected today, and this is where I will end, I promise. Just like, in my life, and I'm guessing in most of us, this is true, but we don't necessarily think about it, but you may think about it more than most. It's like software is everywhere. Like as I played the Oculus Quest, the Facebook product that's a virtual reality headset. I use it for working out. I use it for like 5 different activities inside that. And it's like amazing just how you can drop into a world, do something you don't necessarily do in the real world, see and experience something, and then come out and be in here. And it's just amazing. It's all software, right? Everything we touch. And I shouldn't say it because touch, it's hardware, obviously, but so much of our world is software. So great industry to be in. But to start thinking about so many of the things that you do on a daily basis and how much of it is something that somebody wrote. Now, where we're heading is where machines, we give them data. They then create the algorithms based on the data we give them. So that's machine learning. And that's a whole other thing. But still, programmers needed for that, by the way. It's not going to replace your jobs if that's what you intend to be. All right, enough babbling from me. I hope you enjoy your weekend. I'm going to. I'm actually going to try to. It's good for me. I don't know about for you. I guess I'm not done, but to check out for a while, right? To kind of mentally take some time away. That way, when I come back, I'm fresh. But I do notice there's an impact because I have to get my head back into coding. And I think there's a real benefit to consistently coding as many days as you can. Like I try to code every day of the week so that it's because when you take a break from it, when you come back to it, sometimes it's harder to catch up. It's hard to get your mind back into it. Maybe it's just my older brain. Anyway, peace out. Have a great one. Talk to you later.